All right, so Bobby, I want to start from the top and let's look at character traits of a great leader. Bobby, what are the character traits of a good leader? Do I need to have fun? Do I need to be personable? Do I need to have discipline? What are some of the key character traits of a great leader?
Yeah, no, that's a great one to get started with. I think the first one is humility. And, closely following humility is compassion. People want to know that they're working with or for, however they want to couch it, a human being, right? For me, it's all about people. I'm a servant leader. And throughout my 34 years, across the military and private business and Fortune 100 company, I always gravitated to people who had more of a human element. Following the human element, I think leading by example, right? Being very clear and concise in how they communicate, even being direct. Don't sleep on direct communication because you know where you stand or you know what the mission is, right?
This all makes sense to me. In my business, I've been thinking a lot about this. When I see great businesses, when I see entrepreneurs that are crushing it, not only are they great leaders themselves, but they're empowering and training and bringing up great leaders. Because sometimes your best salesperson might not necessarily be a great leader. So I struggle with this because how do I identify who the great leaders are going to be? I don't want to promote someone to a leadership role. They suck at it and I have to drop them back down. I'm probably just going to lose that person in my organization, which is a no-go. So how do I identify the great leaders within my organization?
I think every organization struggles with that. And as I look back on my 34 years, a lot of people get pulled up because they did this special thing or they can do this special thing. And to your point, the sales guy, he might be awesome at sales, but, what are his people leader qualities, right? So I think the first thing you look for is, I put it in two categories. Someone's either competitive or collaborative, right? And I love competition. I love ambition. Give me someone who's competitive and ambitious and I'll make something, right? But for a leader, I want that person to have that collaborative element as well, right? Because then this person is going to have the privilege to lead others, right? And this person is going to have to get along with his peers. And this person is going to have to deal with, probably, superiors or bosses or supervisors, again, however you want to couch that. So, I would look for that collaborative, component. And, for me personally, from early, I learned that, most of the best leaders have some drive, right? Does that help?
It definitely does. And I'm kind of wondering, Bobby, have you ever had an example personally where you've promoted someone and they surprised you by not accomplishing what you expected? Maybe they were a good collaborator, but once they got to that level, there were some feelings. People felt some sort of way about that leader. Was there ever a time where you promoted someone, they surprised you as being maybe not a great leader and you learned something from that?
No, absolutely. Every time you lift it up, say from subject matter expert to team leader, or from team leader to supervisor, supervisor to manager, it's kind of like sports. It's a different league, right? And the lights get a little bright. And when the lights get a little bright, you have to recall your leadership training or how you were taught to be a leader. And, sort of to your point, most of the people who fail in these situations were not taught to lead. And, people have to be taught to lead. Yes, there are some people who are predisposed to being, aggressive and stuff like that. But, you've got to teach leadership. Sorry.
Well, and one of the things that you had mentioned was lead by example, teach by example. And I think that us as the head of an organization, as the entrepreneur, as the person building up the organization, we do need to lead by example, right? But again, I find it really difficult to find the people that are going to lead by example. Especially in an organization where there's a lot of competition. I remember going back to my years at Best Buy. I was working in retail and I was a good performer. I was top performer. I was always on time. I did good. People liked me. I was collaborative. I was actually a floater. So I'd float around to all the different places in the organization, right? I'd be in TVs 1 minute and then computers, I'd float.
Mhm.
The problem was, and I'll give you a perfect example. I went in to talk to one of the GMs and said, I want to move up. I'm tired of being just a regular salesperson. Like, I want to move up in the organization. He said, okay, Mark, I want you to volunteer here. I want you to do this. He gave me a list of 5 or 6 things that he wanted me to do. I did all of them. Then when it came time to promote, when it came time for the supervisor and the leadership positions to come into place, they went outside of our office, outside of our company, brought in someone who was a complete dope, complete doofus, no respect from within the organization. And what it did is it soured me to the company as a whole. I said, I got to get out of here. And I think what the problem was is that I got passed up for that leadership position because they were afraid that I was going to take theirs. So this idea of competitiveness, I think, is important, but what would you say to the leaders who are afraid to promote because they're afraid that I'm going to eat their lunch?
Well, that's terrible, number one. And number two, it totally speaks to their ego, right? I took give you a personal example. I took the perspective that if I train someone to do my job, well, then I can do a higher job, right? So I've never tried to harbor, my knowledge. I've always tried to pass that on. And, I guess maybe in these companies, there's a fear factor there of, people taking someone else's job. But I would say you definitely made the wrong move, because that's not the type of company, to be in. But it does happen even in corporate America.
Oh, no doubt. But the thing is, like, when you promote someone from within, I have 6 team members now. I've got 3 or 4 subcontractors that I work in. From time to time, I run a podcast agency. I help business owners produce content using AI automation and human power. But, when I try to promote someone from within, I'm worried that there's going to be feelings. People are going to have feelings from within. And I it's always scary, I think, to make those decisions. But I also feel like there's no way I can grow my business without making those decisions. You have any suggestions on how I can build up the business, promote from within, while also maintaining the cohesion between the team I currently have?
I would say don't have those trepidations. If someone is doing their job excellent and they're doing, 30, 40% of the next pay grade or next thing they're supposed to do, they're ripe for promotion, and I would promote those people. I'll go back to example in the military. When you go from an E3 to an E4, you become a non-commissioned officer, right? An NCO. And let me tell you what, you lose friends quick, right? You lose friends quick because they're all jealous because you got promoted and they didn't. But, the leader's journey is long, and promotion is, if you're ready for promotion, you should be promoted. People just have to get over that. I mean, yeah, there's always going to be all kinds of feelings, but, the idea of business is to treat everyone well. But when it comes to promotion, everyone's not going to be happy. That's been my experience over 4 years in the military, private business, 18 years in a Fortune 100 company. There's nothing more polarizing than promotion time, right? But, you've got to think about that person that's putting in the work, that's doing what they're supposed to do. They show up every day, and, they show the willingness and the readiness, to be promoted. And that should be clearly explained to the people who didn't get promoted. And, so performance is 1/2 willingness and 1/2 ability, right? Now, people might have this awesome ability, but sit there with no, willingness to do it. Well, if you show me someone who has half the ability, but high willingness, I'm going to promote that person every time. Maybe that helps.
Yo, are you interested in business ownership? For many entrepreneurs, the journey starts with non-food franchising. Franchising is simply the better option for many entrepreneurs, and demand is at an all-time high. Lucky for you, John Austinson, founder of Franbridge Consulting, is here to help you today. John and his Franbridge Consulting team are part of the largest brokerage in the US and are constantly vetting the market thoroughly. Franbridge is hands down the premier source for the best opportunities in the non-food franchising world. They will find the best business for you, your personality, and your location. From healthcare to dumpsters, from youth soccer to oil changes, even insulation and windows. And the best part, it's 100% fee-free, no additional costs to you. You may have heard John on Entrepreneurs on Fire. He has served as an Inc. 500 franchisor, a multi-brand franchisee, and in fact, he's one of the top 1% consultants nationwide. Listen, sign up for a free consultation with the CEO, John, today, not his assistant, not his sales team. Sign up for free with John today at franbridgeconsulting.com. That's franbridgeconsulting.com. And guess what? He's even going to send you a copy of his book for free, Non-Food Franchising. For free book. You got to love it. So go to franbridgeconsulting.com right now. All right, let's get into the episode. The way I approach it is being, to your point, very direct, saying, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I need you to accomplish in your role at this company. And if they fall short, if the person falls short of that expectation, it becomes much easier, I think, to do the promoting or saying, hey, this is why I didn't give you the position, because I asked you to do this. We've talked about it a few times, but it's not getting done. And I think above all, I value communication from leaders. I want to know, I want to feel important. I want to feel like I'm a crux. I want to feel like I'm a linchpin of the organization. And maybe that's, my love language, or maybe it's my ego, which I can work on. But the other thing that I think is relevant, and you're seeing all these companies doing mass layoffs, Bobby. I mean, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are finding themselves without a job right now. And I think that technology is becoming something that's a big fear. Heck, in my agency, I'm using a ton of automation. I'm using a ton of AI, and I'm using it to empower my staff. But I almost wonder if technology is going to become the new leader, if people are going to become obsolete. If, what use do we have for people nowadays when technology can do our jobs better than us?
No, that's a great question. We just have to reframe how we look at the workplace, right? There's always going to be people and there's always going to be software. It's just how we arrange the pieces on the board, right? And people do want to feel important. That's why people get up and they go to work, to accomplish the business goals, for the business and for them to have some type of enrichment, right? But I don't see, technology, wholesale displacing people. We see that a lot, in movies and so on and so forth. But, it just challenges us as leaders to think differently, right? It's no longer the industrial age of, early 1900. It's 2023, and guess what? Artificial intelligence is here. Whether we like it or not, it's probably not going anywhere. So, it's a challenge more for us to adjust. And the answers aren't 100% clear yet this time. And to your point about layoffs, the last company I worked with for 18 years, I was able to survive like 5 reductions of manpower, right? And what I would say to people out there that are getting displaced by this technology is, don't sit there in fear, make plans. Turn that energy into something. How can you, I think the word today is upskill, or how can you retool yourself? Look, I was in oil and gas 2 weeks ago. Now I'm an entrepreneur. Like, I'm having to deal with digital marketing, Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, and like 30 or 40 different of these programs, right? So I'm a fish out of water. And so I've had to challenge myself, to upskill. And, I won't always have to do these things once I scale past myself. But to even get going, it's tough.
So what do you, and again, just kind of keeping along this thread of technology, the evolution of the workplace, what do you think is more important for a leader? Vision or execution?
Oh, well, again, another great question. So I don't use vision. I think that term's overused. I use line of sight, because the leader's job is to have a line of sight of where the company's going and to clearly articulate that, to the people. Now, execution is important, obviously, but if you don't know where you're going and why, and you don't believe in the mission or business plan, then execution does me no good. Then I'm executing all these things, but to what end, right? So think of it like this: strategy and tactics. Execution is about tactics. And, strategy is, hey, where are we going? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I think you've used the idea of the difference between a manager and a leader. Actually, I'm not going to paraphrase for it, Bobby, because you say it much more eloquently than I do. That's the reason that you wrote the book Lead You, and why I did not write the book Lead You. What would you say the difference is between a manager and a leader?
100%. So the leader is the person who takes action. The leader is the one who puts people first. The leader is the one who sees the forest, right? Now, the manager, on the other hand, this person has a title and they see the trees. Oh, how long is a tree? How wide is a tree? How can we cut this tree? And they might be awesome at processes, putting like pieces together. But when it comes to the line of sight and the people component, that's where the managers fall short every time. And I've seen this over 34 years. I'm not just putting that, out there. I've had a front row seat to it.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I think being a manager is probably one of the worst positions to be in. It's a bad position. Again, coming back to this technology factor, why do I need a manager when I can have a robot that's taking all these data points, aggregating them, monitoring what people are doing, how many clicks, how efficient you are? What do I need? Because that's what a manager typically does, right? A manager says, my boss said, execute the order. I'm going to execute the order. But what do I need a manager for when I can just hire a computer that can do it more efficiently without the propensity for human error? I think it's a dangerous place to be in.
Yeah, there's a reason it's called micromanagement. You never hear micro leadership, do you? It's micromanaging. So, yeah, I loathe micromanaging. Sorry, just something I never could stomach having done to me, and I did not do it to other people. I would give them the strategy and let them figure out how. Because strategy is always the what, and tactics is the how. So let me give you the what, and you, with all your training and experience, you tell me how we're going to sort of do this, right? So, I don't know if you ever read the book by Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership, but, it's exercise in decentralized command, right? The leader, to me, a leader is not a person who makes every single decision. That would be a consolidation of power, and that doesn't help anyone grow. But circling, back to, why do we need managers? Man, I firmly believe that some of this technology is going to engineer out managers from the workplace. Plain
100%.
and simple. I mean, you're always like, I'm not an expert at AI, but, to me, it takes a human with some experience and some direction to create a line of sight for a company, right? I don't know if AI has got there just yet, but, we need humans to be leaders, right? To think critically and it's not just about a simple linear calculation when you're trying to develop a line of sight for an organization. There's a lot of different factors to deal with, and some of those are human. Not really sure that AI could take that into account now. I mean, I'm hearing a lot about this thing called Chat GPT. I did play around with it on the weekend, and it's quite impressive. It's quite impressive, but I don't think we're at the point yet where we're going to trade, awesome leaders for AI.
No, certainly not yet, but the lines are being blurred. This idea of line of sight is really interesting to me. And also, I had asked you the key characteristics of a great leader, and I think the first thing you said was humility. I kind of struggle with this. I feel like it's kind of an oxymoron, right? Because when I look at great leaders, they tend to have egos. They tend to have just tons of charisma and tons of confidence, right? Whereas when I think about humble, I think the guy in the corner who's like, yeah, I'm just here doing my job, staying busy, right? But people don't follow that person. People follow the person that's boisterous, that's confident, that oozes that charisma, right? So how do you balance that? How do you balance being confident, understanding what you're doing, what you're about, while also being humble at the same time? Am I like missing a feature of humility here?
No, not at all. I mean, you can have all those things. You just need to know when and where to check your ego, right? Because eventually, if If it's about you and your ego, well, then the organization is going to suffer. And I don't know anyone who wants to, follow people like that. Maybe yes people, but I've never been a yes people. And, I wouldn't want anyone. I mean, I have a strong personality, as well, but, I could keep my ego in check because I always know that there's someone smarter than me, right? And the people I was privileged to lead, they don't need someone who's going to look down on them or not make decisions, sort of in their best interest, right? For me, being a servant leader, I'll put people first.
So is there like a time and place to like, is it about admitting when you're wrong? Or am I missing the big picture? Am I missing the forest here? Or is it just as simple as saying, oops, I
No,
messed up?
no, you just hit it, taking ownership for things, right? So a manager is going to point a finger and say, well, the sales and marketing teams, man, they just can't, get along and man, it's just not working. And the leader is going to say, well, look, I didn't set expectations good enough verbally or in writing. So let's revisit what the mission is. Let's look at each team and let's look at where our challenges are. Let's find some common ground and then work from there. That's what a leader is going to do.
No excuses. I hate that. My daughter does this all the time. She won't clean the room. She won't clean her room. Or she won't clean up the toys. And I said, I asked you 3 times. Why didn't you do it? She's like, oh, my brother's not helping. The excuses, man, kill the excuses. It's killing your business. No, at the end of the day, and this is one of the reasons I love entrepreneurship. Because at the end of the day, it's nobody's fault but mine. Everything falls on me. And I don't think that pressure is for everybody.
No, it's not. It's a harsh reality, and I want to just circle back to, traits because, I think the most important traits for entrepreneurs, and I've had to revisit, this a little in the last few weeks, in the last couple of months, but, initiative, resilience, and endurance are the traits that entrepreneurs you just have to have it. You have to nail it. You have to learn about it. You have to be taught it, maybe. Initiative is taking action without being told to do something. As an entrepreneur, you're pretty much going to eat what you kill, right? That's the cold hard facts. And, resilience is the ability to recover from, misfortune. And how many times in the course of a month do you experience misfortune? Yeah, probably more than a few. So you have to be able to move, past that. It's just part of the struggle, and I teach this, in my coaching program as part of the leader's journey. But then you sort of bookend, that with endurance, and that's the ability, to withstand hardships and suffering. So when you're an entrepreneur, you're definitely going to have hardships. There's a component of being an entrepreneur where you just have to figure it out, and you can go pay money to this mastermind and you go pay money to this thing and you can buy this program. But guess what? You still have to sit there in your mind and have this conversation and figure the whole thing out, from A to Z. It's okay to get help, but at the end of the day, when all those things fall away, what are you left with?
Yeah, 100%. And I do believe that even if you're not a great leader today, you can become one. I think it's something
Certainly.
that can be exercised, that can be trained. Obviously, you've got your course at the Rubicon COA.com. The Rubicon COA.com is a place you can start to implement these tools, these systems. But give me a little taste, Bobby. I just need a little taste, bro. Give me a little taste. If I want to become a great leader, if I want to become a better leader, what's the first thing I should do? What's the first step? I love it when Jordan Peterson says, if you don't know what to do, just start by cleaning your room. I love that. That's practical. I can clean up my room, right? What's the first step I should take in becoming a better leader?
Again, supreme question. The first thing you do is you have an internal conversation with yourself and you take inventory, right? You check your belief system, check your family status, you check your financial status, you check your health, and the most important conversation as a leader you're ever going to have is with yourself. And, there's reasons for that, right? Self-reflection, right? Emotional regulation, problem solving. Are you asking everyone else to solve your problems or do you solve them, right? And goal setting. But just, back to problem solving, it's the same with, paying all this money to people to do things and buying computer programs, like problem solving. If if I always have someone else solve my problems, then when I don't have everyone else, how can I solve a problem? Right. So for 34 years, there since, I left home and entered the Marine Corps, I've solved my own problems 90% of the time. I do ask for help. I see asking for help as a sign of strength. It's not a weakness. But solving my own problems time after time, year after year, decade after decade, has made me a good problem solver. Right.
Mm.
So I would say, start there is having this internal conversation with yourself. And I'll go just a little bit further. So that would be the bedrock, right? So just like building a house, the next thing, the foundation is to really check your character traits, your leadership attributes, and your value system, right? Like if I ask someone to write down their core values, and after 10 or 15 seconds, I say pens down, and you don't have 3 to 5 core values there, well, then you don't know what your core values are, right? So, it's like sailing across the ocean, right? Would you sail across the ocean without a compass and a map, and some training on how to get to your destination? It's the same thing with character traits and values. Those are the things, that will carry you for your whole career. Mom used to say, manners will take you anywhere. And I believe really what she was saying is, your character and your values.
Yeah, Addie and Ollie, when eventually you're listening to this, saying yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, it makes difference. Please and thank you. It makes
Absolutely.
a difference.
Absolutely.
I will say, it's kind of maybe serendipitous, Bobby, that you're talking about core values. I recently joined a mastermind community for men, for fathers, and that is like the first thing they say before you do anything. Do this core value exercise. It's and I don't mean to sound naive, but I was really not introduced to this concept until about a few weeks ago. So to hear you validate that point about determining your core values is really important. And quite frankly, I think it's a lot more difficult than it sounds.
No, it is difficult, but let's stop there. So my core values are hard work, family, simplicity, respect yourself and others, and believe in yourself. You see how easily I said that?
Yeah.
And those are the things that I live by. People that know me will tell you those are my core values, and I don't waver from them. When it comes to those values, north is north, right? But when you work at it, and this goes to, sovereignty and leadership, right? Having some values and living those values in your life and at work, your circle is going to tend to get small, right? Because it's kind of like Rick Rubin said, art and music divides the audience. Well, start living your values and stick to them and see who hangs around, right? If you've got strong conviction, but that's okay. You want to be around the people who are, like-minded, right? Not copy everything you say or act like you act, or you don't want to act like they act, but, be around people who aren't afraid to live their values. And, it goes back to in personal life, in business, we love predictability, right? So if I know someone, these are his values, he's predictable to me, right? So I can better, sort of collaborate and, have this relationship. So I would encourage you to jump into that exercise and figure out what they are, and, pick 3 to 5. There's hundreds out there. You can't do them all perfectly at once, but, and, I write about this in the book too. It just depends on what stage you are in life, right? If you're young, maybe ambition and exploration are values. When you get to my age, maybe it's, security and health and, family and stuff. But, and there's some you'll take through your whole, career and life, such as, hard work.
Knowing yourself, sometimes a very, very difficult thing, but I definitely believe that if you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. And
man, 100%.
Yeah, I've become, as a father, as a business leader, the core value exercise I think is really important. And obviously, y'all, you can start that journey by going to the RubiconCOA.com to chat with Bobby himself. Bobby, before we get into the rapid fire section, tell us, where's the best place that we can find you? Where do you want us to find you, brother?
Sure. So I mostly hang out on LinkedIn. That's kind of the main site, for the business. And I'm on Facebook personally. And then on on Instagram as, sort of myself and the Rubicon COA.
Brilliant. And guess what, y'all? I'm going to make it super easy for you. I'm going to put a link right below in the description so you connect with Bobby. You can get him on your show. You can go deeper on these leadership qualities, because I think that leaders are in short supply these days, gentlemen, ladies, boys and girls, dogs and cats. They're in short supply. Become a leader and win. All right, cool. Bobby, you ready for the rapid fire here, brother?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right. Bobby, what's the scariest movie you've ever seen?
It was with Nancy Drew and vampires.
Okay. I dig it. That sounds like an oldie but goodie. If you could sit next to anyone on an airplane, who'd you sit next to?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Probably Jimi Hendrix.
Little Jimmy. I can dig it. Overrated, underrated hot dogs.
Underrated.
Would you say that hot dogs are a sandwich?
Sure.
Okay. I'm sorry. This is top of mind. I was talking to my kids about this the other day because that's a conundrum and a half. Bobby, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
Probably somewhere in Colorado. Yeah.
Who is your favorite leader?
Well, I'm going to have to say Patton. Yeah. Amazing person. I know he had a little bit of, behavior challenges, but, let me tell you what, when you needed someone to get, something done, I mean, that guy was there. That guy was there. And I mean, oddly enough, he lacked a little bit of humility, but, gosh, if you study him and what he accomplished, it's just amazing.
And it's not to go off on a huge tangent here, but when I'm part of a men's group. We've been digging into the Bible, and some of the concepts in there are so tough. It's like you're learning one concept, but you have to balance it with other concepts. So, being confident, having an ego while being humble at the same time. These are difficult. They're conundrums.
It is. And, nothing's perfect. And, if you go to my book in chapter 10, there's a whole chapter dedicated to perfect where, I'm not a perfect leader. None of us are. But, we just have to give our best, every day. But, as far as for Patton, he, at the end of the day, he had his, men's best thoughts in mind, and, trying to do something, great for the country.
100%. And I think that that point from the Bible that we were reading the other day was, blessed are the peacemakers, part of the Beatitudes. I'm like, man, but you can't always have peace. How can you be peaceful all the time? That doesn't work when someone's trying to light your house on fire. So anyway, interesting concept. Fine. I don't want to go off on a huge tangent here, but Bobby, final question here for you. If you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, what would you say?
Stay aggressive. Aggressive is always going to win. Again, back to action. Those who are taking action are going to get what they want. These large corporations, and sometimes, they want you to be, so polished that, you kind of end up like grandpa, but I would say stay aggressive.
Actually, I have one more bonus question for you. I heard you talk about this the other day, and I think it's really, really good. What is better, the wrong decision or indecision?
Oh, no, this is the golden question. So there's the right decision, the wrong decision, and no decision. No decision is the absolute worst. If I make a wrong decision and it's not egregious, I have the ability to learn from it, right? So a good decision, yay, I did what I was supposed to do. I learned. Wrong decision, as long as it's not egregious, I've still learned. But no decision, it just speaks about so many things, just lack of courage, it reeks of fear. And, again, going back to leading by example, if so my last team was 180 people, right? With had 5 team leaders and, sub teams and all that. So you think, if I didn't make decisions, everyone else would do the same thing. They would just wait for someone else to tell them. Probably the last 15 years of my 34-year career, brother, I make decisions, and I never made the egregious ones. So, I learned. I made some wrong ones, admittedly, but, I learned from those, and I, tried never to duplicate the same one twice.
Boom. There you have it. Great leaders, humble, and they make decisions. Bobby, thanks for joining the show today, brother.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.